Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with part 2 in our series of Tough Symphonists, another trio of symphonic composers who will give you a run for your money and challenge your earballs or eardrums or ear things, whatever they are, earbuds, I don't know, your ears, the things you hear with. Here's the point. Here is the deal. These three composers all have something in common. What they have in common is that they started out as populist or easier to take or more traditional, whatever formulation you choose. They started out easier to listen to, more conservative, and they became tough symphonists. All three of them in their way. Now, this is not an unusual phenomenon. There are many composers whose style evolves, and it evolves in unpredictable ways. It evolves in ways that may make their music more traditional, or it might become more avant-garde. It all depends on the person. This particular formula, that is relatively easier to take to relatively more difficult, isn't really that uncommon. There are a lot of contemporary composers who went through this. I'm thinking just of American composers. There's Walter Piston, David Diamond, who else? Oh my goodness, there's just a whole Peter Menon. There's another one. I mean, that's three right there. I could do those three if I could find enough music that's been recorded to play you samples, because you've got to hear samples. I mean, otherwise, what's the point, right? So I am not playing those three, but I'm just telling you about them because we'll listen to other things by them, and maybe not as part of this series, but I've got to have stuff to do for about like the next 20 years, so there's no rush. Anyway, these three composers are Carlos Chavez, Malcolm Arnold, and Joly Braga Santos, the Portuguese composer who I have been mercilessly flogging and pushing on you because I just think he's a great composer, and he's coming last. But let's start initially with Carlos Chavez, the great national composer of Mexico. Now, Chavez is popular for his Sinfonia India, a single movement, 12-ish minute, I think. How long is it on this performance? Yeah, I don't know about that. 13 minutes, 12 minutes. Delightful piece of Americana. I mean Americana in the widest sense, that is North Americana. It sounds a bit like Copland. It has colorful native percussion. It's a bit primitivist in the Stravinskyan style. In fact, some of you mentioned Chavez in our talk on primitivism and sequels to Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, and correctly so, because Chavez began his career there, but it slowly evolved elsewhere. So let's listen to the two styles, because in every single one of these examples, we're going to hear the earlier, more relaxing to listen to style, and the later, more intense and gnarly style. And you'll hear these are recognizably the same composers in so many ways, but the style has changed. I don't know whether you call it evolved or devolved. That's your choice. There are arguments on both sides. So here is a bit of the Sinfonia India. This is the Voxbox 2 CD set. It's the only complete set of Chavez symphonies out there at the moment. There were other performances of them, of course. There was an ASV disc that had a few of them. Chavez himself did some on Everest, but this is still a great set. It's still the one to get. Eduardo Mata, the late Eduardo Mata, with the London Symphony Orchestra on Vox. So here is a bit of the Sinfonia India. fun, enjoyable, perky, nationalistic, percussive. It's delightful. But Chavez wrote 6 symphonies. And number 4 is called the Romantica, the Romantic. Well, this is not like Bruckner's number 4. Also, the Romantic. This is quite different. I think the romantic aspect of the music has to do with its passionate intensity, but it is a recognizably gnarlier style, more contrapuntal. You have the same wide open sonorities, the same interesting opposition between strings and wind instruments. I mean, it's recognizably Chavez, but boy, is it different. Here's the opening of the Romantica to compare to the opening of the India. Here you go. Quite a difference, isn't it? Really marvelous symphony, though, by the way. It is not hard to follow the argument. It is extremely, extremely intense and beautiful. It's only 21 minutes long and sort of a single connected movement. Really, really good stuff. And he wrote, like I said, 6 of them, and they are marvelous pieces. And since you can get them on Vox, it's inexpensive. This thing has been out forever. You should hear these pieces and take some time to get to know them. They're quite marvelous. Next, Malcolm Arnold. He of the film score to The Bridge on the River Kwai, although not the famous march. That's the Colonel Bogey March by Kenneth Alford. Let's not get it confused. But he wrote the rest of the incidental music, the film music, for The Bridge on the River Kwai, and those famous English dances and Scottish dances and Irish dances. He was a trumpeter, a genuine populist as a composer, at least initially, a really complicated person who went through, several bouts of depression, institutionalization, suicide attempts. I mean, he had all kinds of things going wrong. And he had problems with his kids who were autistic, at least one of them, maybe 2 of them. He had a very, very sad life. And because of his difficulty, his mental difficulties, even though he wrote tons of music, and a lot of it's just fantastic, fabulous music, he was ignored by the English musical establishment really until the very end of his life. He was also very poor at the end of his life because he had drunk or gambled away everything he had. It was really a sad story. But his music is marvelous. And after the 6th symphony, he wrote 9. After the 6th symphony, his style changed. It changed considerably. It changed very considerably while recognizably remaining Malcolm Arnold. I'm going to play you the finale, a bit of the finale of the 6th, where he's starting to get a little edgier, although there's just always a lot of dissonance in his music. But it's a kind of diatonic dissonance. That is, it's within a very, very tonal framework. But here is the finale of the 6th, and it's really kind of cool. Here you go. That is recognizably Malcolm Arnoldian, if you want to call it that. And these are wonderful performances, by the way. They're on Naxos with the National Orchestra of Ireland under Andrew Penny. These had the composer's own imprimatur, and very rightly so. But then, the next symphony on, what a difference! Here is the opening of the 7th, and we are in another world. Even though there's a similarity in the use of strings and brass and in sort of the popular rhythms and the simplicity of that, but it's a very different composer. I mean, same composer, very different emotional climate, let's call it that. And then when you get to the 9th Symphony, by the time you get to the 9th, it ends with a very, very desolate slow movement, sometimes only in 2 parts, that really occasioned quite a bit of controversy because of its bitterness and its sense of emptiness and desolation. A very, very sad ending, but still very, very moving music. And you may want to follow his evolution from the ha-ha, razzle-dazzle, fun and games of the first couple symphonies through the Neo-Sibelian third to the Caribbean percussion in the 4th, to the fife and drum corps business in the 5th, to the 6th, which we just heard, and then the last 3, the gnarly symphonies, the tough symphonies. Finally, our last tough symphonist is Portuguese composer Joly Braga Santos, who is just a wonderful, wonderful composer. Now, his first 4 symphonies, he wrote 6, are in a style that owes an awful lot to Vaughan Williams and Respighi. He studied a bit with Vaughan Williams, apparently, or knew him, or they had something to do with each other. And the style is modal and very, very attractive and somewhat obviously derivative, especially in the 3rd Symphony, which I think is amazing. I once did a mashup of the 3rd Symphony and Vaughan Williams' Pastoral Symphony, where you can just jam them together without changing key or editing anything. They just run together beautifully. Anyway, but his 4th Symphony, the 4th Symphony of Braga Santos, the finale of which makes an absolutely fabulous ringtone, I used it for one, is the apotheosis of that modal style that he got from Vaughan Williams and Respighi and from that sort of thing. It's sunny, it's warm. It ends with this glorious sort of socialist realist apotheosis, which actually was set as a chorus in the revised version, which thank God nobody plays. It's a youth chorus in praise of, the happy socialist future of youthdom, and it's just awful. And thank God the original version didn't have that chorus. It has the same music, it just doesn't have voices on top of it, and you can leave them out, and it sounds wonderful, as this performance featuring the National Symphony Orchestra of Ireland. Again, boy, they're doing some great stuff in Ireland. Conducted by Álvaro Casuto, the fantastic Portuguese conductor and also a composer of note. Here, however, is a bit of the finale of the 4th Symphony, which rises to this huge climax before the big tune comes in for the apotheosis. It sounds like Western country, not country Western music. I mean Western like the Magnificent Seven, like Elmer Bernstein Western or Copland Western. And here it is. You want to hear the whole thing, don't you? I mean, it's just fun. It's a big, beefy, take no prisoners, neo-romantic, modal, western, extravaganza type symphony. But then, in the very next symphony that he wrote, everything changed. Braga Santos became an avant-gardist, believe it or not. And he started exploiting music. It wasn't 12-tone music, but it was very atonal music. Extremely atonal music based on texture and mass and sound sculptural elements. And the Fifth Symphony is particularly rich in those qualities. I'm going to play you two excerpts from this symphony because it is just so much fun. Now, the first excerpt is the scherzo, the second movement. This comes after a totally textural and atonal first movement that explores really rather cool sonorities, I have to say. But this movement is based on Braga Santos's exploration of folk music from Madagascar, and it's called Zavala, and it uses like 9 vibraphones and tons of percussion. It is the coolest thing you've ever heard in your life. Have a listen to this. It's just really, really hot. Ooh, baby. Isn't that special? It's just fabulous. It really is. And the whole symphony is like that. The whole symphony is just wonderful. It's a masterpiece of Braga Santos's late style. But the finale, oh boy, the finale is a primitivist extravaganza. And I'm going to play you a section from the middle that ends the first section. It has 2 sections, this finale. One is a very post-Stravinsky pounding, violent exordium, and then there's an agonized, chromatic, lyrical theme that leads to a huge climax and a big crash in the tam-tam, and out of nowhere, this major happy chord ends the whole symphony. It's like, ta-da! It's really surprising. Very surprising. Some might feel it's kind of a cop-out, not effective. I just think it's really cool. I really do. But I want to play the ending of this first violent section. What you're going to hear is a pile-up, a giant chromatic chord cluster pile-up that leads to a recapitulation of the opening. And just listen to this. This is like no other music you've ever heard. It's just tremendous. gnarly, yes, but exciting as hell. And the other composer, by the way, who did this, but not in symphonies, which is why he's not here, is Ginastera, who began, of course, as the Argentinian nationalist composer, for which he's much acclaimed today, and then became an atonal, expressionistic wild man. And like things like the piano concertos and the cello concertos and the operas, Don Rodrigo and Bomarzo, they're just wonderful pieces. But in any case, so Braga Santos had a similar kind of progression, similar to Ginastera, and the opposite, by the way, of some of these other people. I mean, like Chavez, for example, who started out as a primitivist and then became sort of more avant-garde, somewhat neoclassical, but gnarly. And Braga Santos started out as, well, he didn't start out gnarly, but he started out sort of national and nice and neoclassical and became a primitivist. Although the Sixth Symphony, which is his last, is a choral symphony based on poetry about the sea, which is appropriate if you come from Portugal. And it's also recorded in this series with Alvaro Cazuto. Here it is, Alvaro Cazuto and the Portuguese Symphony Orchestra in this particular case for the First and the Fifth Symphonies. The performance of the Sixth is not as good, I think, as the others in the series, not because the playing isn't good, but because the singing leaves a little something to be desired. And it's a tougher piece to get into. It represents a synthesis, I think, of Braga Santos's avant-garde tendencies and his earlier tendencies. And I think it still awaits a really persuasive performance, but that's me. I don't know it well enough to be able to say that for certainty. But boy, that Fifth Symphony is a knockout, isn't it? Isn't that just cool? So here we have it. 3 tough symphonists who didn't start that way, but that's how they wound up. And we are the more fortunate for that because every work has its own individuality, and whether you like the late style or whether you prefer the earlier style, granted, these tougher pieces are never going to be as popular, but my God, they're musically rewarding. And I hope you take the opportunity to explore some of the rewards that they offer. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you for joining me in part 2 of Tough Symphonists. Stay tuned. There'll be more. Take care.